Today we are going to talk about the murder of Emani Gabrielle Moss. Emani Moss was born on April 23rd of 2003. Shortly after Emani's birth, her mother, who was addicted to drugs, surrendered her parental rights, and Emani's father, Emani, gained sole custody of her. Emani was one of 5 children. Her mother surrendered her parental rights to all of her children, and Emani largely raised Emani and often took her to the Freedom Christian Church, and that is where he met Tiffany Moss, a preschool teacher. Emani and Tiffany married in July 2009 and had 2 children together, a son and a daughter. Though there are no records indicating that Tiffany abused her biological children, she did abuse Emani, and that happens quite a bit. I don't understand it. I don't understand. They don't abuse their own children, but they do abuse their partner's children. I've never understood why that is. The abuse increased in March of 2010. After a beating, Emani caused Moss to lose her job. Emani, then age 6, told a school nurse that she was afraid to go home with a bad report card because she worried that her parents would hurt her. She also told the nurse that her stepmother had spanked her with a curtain rod. The nurse then found multiple scabs, bruises, and welts on Emani's arms, back, chest, legs, and shoulders. Emani was taken to the police headquarters. Tiffany was arrested and charged with first-degree child cruelty. Tiffany admitted to hitting Emani 3 times after she failed to do her homework. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years of probation. Her ass needed to be locked up. Of Georgia's first offender program. The plea deal was signed by the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services. Family Services dismissed a case against Tiffany and Emani after they completed parenting classes. After March of 2010, beating Emani was taken out of her father and stepmother's home and placed with her grandmother Robin, staying with her for about 6 months. During this time, Emani's school performance improved. Emani fought for custody of Emani, and in the fall of 2010, Family Services returned her to him. Robin fought to retain custody of her granddaughter. Though she suspected that Emani was being abused, she could not persuade the authorities to give her custody. Prosecutors later argued at trial that March of 2010 abuse incident launched an escalating cycle of more abuse that ultimately resulted in Emani's death. I don't understand how they could not see that coming. I don't understand these. If they're not going to do anything, what's the point of having Family Services if they're going to do absolutely nothing? Moss had pleaded guilty to beating Emani. She was no longer allowed to teach preschool. Thank God. Those kids are lucky. I wish Emani was that lucky. This led to her to resent Emani, and she blamed her for the job loss. Of course, it's not Tiffany's fault. It's Emani's fault. Tiffany did absolutely nothing wrong. From 2011 to the summer of 2013, the Moss family moved around. sometimes living with family. Emani, who worked long hours, did not see his daughter often. He later reported at trial that she would eat a lot when he saw her on the weekends when he was in charge of the children. When the Mosses lived on their own, Emani rarely saw extended family. In May 2013, the Mosses visited Emani's sister, Sharnice, for Mother's Day. Sharnice and Robin noticed that Emani's hair had been cut. When Robin confronted Moss about it, Moss replied, "If you act ugly, you should look ugly." Sharnice also noticed that Emani acted in a more timid fashion. After the 2012-2013 school year ended, Emani and Moss announced that they would pull Emani from public school and homeschool her. Sharnice objected to the idea and called Family Services, asking them to intervene. What do you think Family Services did? Absolutely nothing. On August 16th, next. At some point, Moss began to starve Emani. According to prosecutors, the Starvation likely lasted several weeks. During this time, Emani was confined to her bedroom. Neighbors only saw Moss's biological children and did not know they had an older sister. Emani eventually became too weak to move and was unable to leave her bed, even to urinate or defecate. Though Moss denied food to Emani, she did take care and feed her other two children. On several occasions, she sent Emani pictures of meals she had prepared for the children, and another instance, she asked her husband to bring home cookie dough so she could bake. At trial, prosecutors pointed out that Emani would have had to smell the cookies being baked as she laid in her room starving to death. According to Dr. Stafenberg, the medical examiner who testified at trial, the process of starving to death would have been very painful. At first, Emani would have experienced hunger pains. Then she would have become fatigued. She would continue to lose energy and weight until she ultimately died. In the early evening of October 24th, Emani suffered what Emani believed was a seizure. Emani testified that when he came home, Moss told him there was something wrong with Emani. He then went to the bathroom where he found his daughter in the bathtub shaking. Emani was unresponsive and her eyes were rolling back and forth. Emani moved Emani to her bed where she stayed for the next couple of days. Yeah, let's not take her to a hospital. Emani visited her during this time and tried to feed her but was unsuccessful. Emani died on October 28th, 2013. By the time Emani died, she was severely underweight, with Dr. Stafenberg describing her as more or less skin and bones. She weighed 32 pounds, the weight of an average 3-year-old. Additionally, her organs were found in autopsy to be very small. On October 28th, Moss called Emani at work to tell him that Emani was dead. But you haven't heard the worst of it. What happened next is truly horrific. Emani testified at trial that when he came home from work, the family seemed normal, with the children playing and Moss watching TV. He found his daughter laying on a blanket on her bedroom floor. He told his wife that they should call the police, though she insisted they couldn't because she would lose her children. Moss told Emani that they needed to hide Emani's body and be on our criminal mind, whatever the hell that means. Emani wrapped Emani's body with blankets and moved her to the computer room. For several days, the couple kept Emani's body in their apartment, and their lives largely went back to normal. Emani testified at trial that he would go to work and spend time at home with Emani's body, grieving. He wasn't grieving. That's a load of shit. The day after attempting to burn Emani's body, Emani went to work with Emani's body in the backseat of his car. He confessed to a friend who urged him to call the police. Why didn't this friend call the police? This friend did nothing, and that makes him complicit. That makes him accessory. That makes him accessory after the fact. Emani thought about it, and after coming home from his second job, he decided to contact the police. At 4:00 a.m., he made the call, saying that he was suicidal. Emani informed Moss about his call to the police. Upon learning that the police had been called, Moss placed the trash can with Emani's remains in a grassy area at the apartment and fled in the family vehicle with her children. Upon arrival at the apartment, police were told by Emani that Emani had drunk some chemicals and died. He claimed that he had panicked and put her body in a trash can outside the apartment and tried to cremate it. This is your daughter. This is your daughter. Why are you covering for this woman? This is truly insane. I've never heard anything like this. Police found the body and did not believe Emani's story, quickly identifying him and his wife as suspects. Emani was arrested almost immediately. Moss dropped her children off at her mother's house and ultimately turned herself in. Emani ultimately confessed to trying to cover up Emani's murder by reporting her as a runaway and trying to burn her body. In 2015, Emani pled guilty to felony murder and concealing a death. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In exchange, he agreed to testify against Moss, who rejected a plea deal that would have allowed her to be sentenced to life in prison. I don't understand why she did that. I don't know if she thought she could beat the charges, but even at trial, she did nothing. She didn't cross-examine any witnesses. She didn't call any witnesses of her own. She didn't give an opening statement or a closing argument. Even during the penalty phase, she did nothing. I don't understand what her end game was. I don't know, maybe she wanted to die. Emani is currently incarcerated at the Smith State Prison in Glenville, Georgia. Moss's trial began on April 15th, 2019. Trial began on April 15th, 2019 and was presided over by Judge George Hutchinson. The jury consisted of 6 men and 6 women. Moss, who was appointed lawyers through the state office of the Capital Defender. Let me explain the difference between public defender and capital defender. The public defender's office has an entire division dedicated to death penalty cases. These attorneys are specialize in death penalty cases, and in a death penalty case, an indigent defendant is assigned 2 or 3 attorneys. I don't remember how many it is. But that's the difference between the public defender and the capital defenders. However, Tiffany, in her infinite wisdom, decided to represent herself despite Judge Hutchinson's efforts to persuade her otherwise. Instead of representing her, her defense attorneys served as standby attorneys to answer legal questions. Okay, so standby attorneys are also known as shadow counsel. That's all they do, is give you legal advice. They may tell you when to object. But you are essentially on your own. Representing yourself is not an appealable issue, and you are held to the same standards as an attorney. You are granted no leeway. During pretrial hearings and jury selection, Judge Hutchinson repeatedly urged Moss to rely upon the standby counsel, but she refused. Moss did not give an opening statement, nor did she cross-examine any witnesses or give a closing argument. District Attorney Danny Porter and Assistant District Attorney Lisa Jones called 18 witnesses, including Emani's aunt, grandmother, and 4th grade teacher. They also called Emani and Dr. Staffenberg, the medical examiner, who performed an autopsy on Emani's body. On April 29th, Moss was convicted on all 6 counts, including 1 count of malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of cruelty to children, and 1 count of concealing a death. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, which is actually very quick, considering that they had to deliberate on 6 charges. That was a really fast verdict. During the sentencing phase, Moss once again declined to address the jury or present any mitigating evidence or have her relatives who attended the trial testify on her behalf. She chose to refuse. She also refused to make a closing argument. In the state's closing argument, Porter argued that Moss did not deserve a life sentence, whether it be life without parole or life with parole. She should not be given the opportunity to be released. He argued because she would never change. She's shown you too much of her capacity for cruelty. Therefore, there will always be that dark side waiting to come out. He also argued that for Moss, life without parole would not be a bad sentence than death, because she did not regret her crimes and would never be bothered by them. So, I disagree. I do not agree with the death penalty as punishment for Moss.
You can be seated. Thank you very much. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm informed you have a verdict. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is it unanimous?
Just as it's wrong.
Has it been signed by your foreperson?
It has.
Please give it to the bailiff. This is the jury's verdict in case 18B 1541-1, State of Georgia versus Tiffany Nicole Moss. Count 1, findings of jury as to alleged statutory aggravating circumstances. We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the offense of murder as alleged in Count 1 was outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhuman in that it involved torture of the victim before death. We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the offense of murder as alleged in count 1 was outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhuman in that it involved depravity of mind of the defendant. Signed and dated by the foreperson. Verdict as to penalty, count 1, murder. We, the jury, recommend and fix the penalty as death. Signed and dated by the foreperson. Please give it to counsel for their review as to form, sir. Any exceptions to the form of the verdict by the state?
None from the state as to form or substance.
Any exceptions to the form of the verdict by the defense?
No, Your Honor.
I've always been curious about what their confliction was. Only thing I can think of is maybe there were juries who did not believe in the death penalty and didn't want to vote to put her to death. I'd be very curious to learn what their conflict was. Sentencing occurred on May 1st. Judge Hutchinson agreed with the jury's recommendation and sentenced Moss, then age 36, to death by lethal injection.
This is the jury's verdict in case 18B 1541-1, State of Georgia versus Tiffany Moss. Count 1, findings of jury as to alleged statutory aggravating circumstances. We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the offense of murder as alleged in count 1 was outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhuman in that it involved torture of the victim before death. We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the offense of murder as alleged in count 1 was outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhuman in that it involved depravity of mind of the defendant. Signed and dated by the foreperson. Verdict as to penalty, count 1, murder. We, the jury, recommend and fix the penalty as death. Signed and dated by the foreperson. Please give it to counsel for their review as to form, sir. Our jury's been excused. We'll proceed immediately to sentencing. Is there anything that the state would like to say before I impose sentence on the defendant?
No, Your Honor. The jury's spoken and the state has nothing further to add.
Miss Moss, if you'd stand up for me, please, ma'am. Is there anything that you'd like to say before I impose sentence, ma'am?
No, sir, Your Honor.
Ma'am, with respect to count 1, the jury has found you guilty of murder and other counts contained in the indictment against you. They have considered the circumstances surrounding that murder and found that aggravating circumstances exist. With respect to count 1, ma'am, I impose the sentence of death. Counts 2 and 3 are vacated by operation of law. They're felony murder charges. Counts 4 and 5, the cruelty charges, of course, merge. With respect to count 6, I impose a 20-year sentence to be served in confinement, ma'am. With respect to things that you should also be considering, ma'am, you should understand that the law requires that the date of execution be scheduled by the court at this time. CGA section 171034 requires that the court set the date of execution not less than 20 days nor more than 60 days from today's date, and there's a 7-day window within which the execution is to take place. I fix the date of your execution, ma'am, as the 7-day interval between noon on June the 7th, 2019 and noon on June the 14th, 2019. You should also understand, ma'am, that there's an automatic review process of a conviction in a case like this. A defendant may elect to proceed either by motion for new trial or direct appeal, or may allow the case to be presented directly to the Supreme Court for review. CGA section 171035 requires an automatic review of a death sentence, and that will be conducted whether you file either one of those motions. But understand, ma'am, if you'd like to file either a motion for new trial or a notice of appeal, you have 30 days from today's date within which to do so. Ma'am, you've obviously chosen not to have representation throughout this portion of this case, but obviously you also have the right to have an attorney represent you in connection with any appeal that might be taking place as well. Thus far, you've rejected all efforts to give you legal representation, but I want you to know that you do have the opportunity to ask this court to appoint counsel to assist you with whatever appeal it is that might be necessary. Also, the Capital Defender's Office may have some resources that might be brought into bear to pursue whatever appellate needs it is that might exist in connection with this case. But I want you to understand that if you ask for appointed counsel and you qualify, ma'am, I would certainly consider appointing counsel to represent you in connection with whatever appeal it is that might be necessary. I want to also let you know, ma'am, that there is a process that you could collaterally use to attack something connected with this case. It's called habeas corpus. Your standby counsel can give you more detailed information about exactly what habeas corpus is and how you might pursue it if you're interested in doing so. But you do need to understand, ma'am, that there's a 4-year time limit within which you have to pursue habeas corpus relief. That time limit begins now. Are you the holder of any weapons carry licenses here in the state of Georgia or anywhere else, ma'am? I will ask the state to retain the evidence that was presented through the course of our proceedings as an officer of the court and retain it safe pending any appeal that might be necessary. Ma'am, do you understand the sentence that I've imposed in this case?
Yes, sir.
All right, ma'am. That concludes our proceedings. You may go with the deputies.
Moss was the first person to be sentenced to death in Georgia in over 5 years. Judge Hutchinson also scheduled her execution for between June 7th and June 14th, 2019. Now let me explain to you why this was done. Georgia law is law in most places. A date of execution must be set immediately, although it is only a tentative date, because you are entitled to an automatic appeal, and then there are appeals after that, which these appeals grant an automatic stay of execution, but nonetheless the execution date must be set immediately. And also the odds of her ever being executed are very slim. Porter said of the death sentence, "There's no joy when a jury imposes a death sentence, but this was one of the worst cases I've ever seen. The first time you look at it, it made you sick. The last time you look at it, it makes you sick. Well, yeah, it's not pretty. None of it's pretty. I mean, your first reaction is they should have shot this woman the minute they found her. But that does not make it right for us to kill them. It just simply doesn't." The execution did not occur, obviously, during the June 7 to 14 time frame due to an appeals process, which resulted in an automatic stay of execution being applied to the initial scheduled execution date. She is currently incarcerated in Annandale State Prison and is Georgia's only female death row inmate. If Moss is eventually executed, she will be the 3rd woman in Georgia to be executed in 1945. And thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd like to know what you think. Please leave your comments below. And I will see you guys in the next video.